Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Eruvin. We are up to Perek Aleph, Mishnah Zayin. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilun Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbaim, Neriyahu ben Burcha, Israel of Menuchatam, Began Eden, Amen. We are continuing our discussion regarding an alley that is enclosed on three sides and open to the street on the fourth side, in which you're not allowed to carry unless a crossbeam or pole is placed at the open side. Mishnah Zayin now continues the discussion. Bakol osin lechayayin, we may make the poles out of anything. Afilu b'davar sheyesh bo ruach chaim, even a living creature, meaning an animal that is at least 10 tefachim tall, tied to the side of the alley, has the same effect as a pole. Now the Tosfot explains that the animal must be bound so that it does not run away. In addition, it must be tied to prevent it from crouching and lowering its height to less than 10 tefachim, because we are concerned that should it run away or crouch, people might not notice and they will continue to carry, even though carrying had become forbidden because you have removed the pole. Rabbi Yossi Oser, however, Rabbi Yossi forbids using a living creature as a pole because it might die and become shorter than 10 tefachim. Now the Mishnah discusses the use of a living creature in two other areas of halacha. The first is the cover of a grave, golel, which is tameh and can transmit tumah. And the commentators explain that this cover of a grave is a large stone or similar object that covers a grave and seals its top. The rabbis learned from a pasuk that this cover is a primary source of tumah, similar to a corpse. Therefore, someone who touches it becomes tameh for at least 7 days, as the Gemara says in Masechet Chulin, page 72a, and the Rambam writes in Echut Tumat Tameh, chapter 2, halacha 15, and chapter 6, halacha 4, and the Rab says it retains the status even after being removed from the grave. So Tanaim disagree whether a living creature that was used to cover a grave is subject to this halakha, to this law, tameh mishum golel, and a living creature transmits tumah if it was used as the cover of a grave. Now, although living creatures other than humans are generally unable to become tameh, an animal used to cover a grave is an exception to this rule. The Rabbi Meir mitaer, however, Rabbi Meir says that it is tahor, meaning it cannot become tameh and certainly does not transmit tumah. And the commentators explain Rabbi Meir holds that any partition formed by a living creature is not halachically valid, because the life force that holds it up is not tangible, and this rule also applies to other partition-like structures, including a golel, as the Gemara explains on page 15b in Masechet Eruvin. And the Rav says, "Ve'ena halacha does not follow Rabbi Meir." Now, Tanaim also disagree regarding a divorce document. Tanaim also disagree regarding a divorce document that was written on a living creature. V'chotvin alav giteh nashim. The Tana Kama says we may write divorce documents on a living creature. Rabbi Yossi Aglili posel. However, Rabbi Yossi Aglili rules that such a divorce document is invalid, and the Rav explains the Torah writes in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 24, pasuk 1, regarding a get. It describes a get as a sefer, which Rabbi Yossi Aglili understands as referring to a document written on parchment, as Rashi explains his opinion on page 15b. Now he interprets the pasuk as excluding a get written on a living creature. Rabbi Yossi interprets this pasuk as excluding a get written on a living creature, and the Rav does say, the halacha follows the opinion of the Tana Kama. And the Rav goes on to discuss im katav la get bekeren shel para, if you wrote the get on the horn of the cow, v'natana et hapara, and you gave her the cow, dashten tzich tzitza lachar shenichtav kasher, you don't have to cut the horn off, you can leave it on the animal, the get would be kosher. Aval im lo natana et hapara ela et hakeren, but if you only gave her the horn and not the cow, kevan shetzich tzitza lo megarsha be, since you have to return the cow is not yours, you're only keeping the horn, since you have to cut off the horn, that would make the get invalid, and that's a different discussion. The Gemara in Gittin discusses v'kata v'natan, has to be a direct writing and giving with no interruption, such as cutting it off, such as kitzitza. And that is the Rabotai of Mishnah Zayin. Mishnah Chet now continues, in order to convert an open area into a Reshut Yachid, a private domain in which carrying is permitted, it must be enclosed by partitions. So the following Mishnah states some basic requirements that partitions must meet in order to be valid for this purpose. Sheyara shechanta babik'ah. If a caravan, meaning a group of travelers, camped in an open plain before Shabbat, which the commentators explain, a plain meaning a large area of flat land, is neither a Reshut Rabim, a public domain, nor a Reshut Yachid, nor a private domain. It's not a Reshut Rabim because it's not designated for public passage, and it's not a Reshut Yachid because it's not enclosed by partitions. Rather, it has the status of a karmelit, in which carrying is forbidden according to rabbinic laws. The Mishnah will teach how to convert such an area into Reshut Yachid by erecting a fence around it. So again, the Mishnah says, Sheyara shechanta babika, if a caravan camped in an open plain before Shabbat, vikifua bichle behema, and they surrounded their camp with animal gear such as saddles and blankets, creating a makeshift fence in which there are many gaps. Mitaltirim betocha, one may carry in the camp. And the Tefillat Yisrael writes, even though the fence was put up for only a short time, it's still a valid partition. Ubilvad, the Mishnah says, shieh gader gavoa asrat tvachim, as long as the fence is at least 10 tvachim high, because the Gemara in Masechet Sukkah, page 5b, says 10 tvachim is the minimum height for any halachic partition. Velo yu feratzot yiterot ala binyan, and the total width of all the gaps is not more than the total width of all the solid parts. But the commentaries write, if the total width of the gaps is more than the total width of the solid parts, the partition is invalid. And the Mishnah Berurah explains, brought down by the Elucidated Art School in chapter 362, Seif Katan 45, that each side, each partition, so to speak, of the enclosure is viewed independently. If one side is mostly open, that side is invalid, even if the others are entirely closed. And this affects an enclosure that has only the minimum 3 sides. If just one of them is mostly open, the entire enclosure is invalid since it has only 2 valid sides. Now this applies where the gaps are not too wide. This leniency of the Mishnah, how to make a makeshift wall. Now a gap that is very wide can disqualify the partition even if it is the only gap and the rest of the partition is solid. The Mishnah says, Kol pirtza shi ke'eser amot muteret. Any gap that is 10 amot wide or less is permitted, meaning it does not disqualify the partition. And the commentators write, the partition is valid, provided the combined width of all the gaps is not more than the combined width of all the solid parts, like we said. Midnei shi kefetach, because it is considered like an entrance that was built into the wall, rather than a breach that destroys the wall. Yeter mikan asur. However, a gap that is more than 10 amot wide is forbidden, meaning it disqualifies any partition, even one that is mostly solid, because it is too wide to be viewed as an entrance and is regarded as a breach instead. And the commentaries write, an entrance is usually not more than 10 amot wide. Therefore, as long as the gap is 10 amot wide or less, it can be viewed as an entrance that provides access to the enclosed area. Since an entrance is a necessary part of a wall, the partition is regarded as though it continues across the gap, thereby closing it, and carrying would be permitted even directly opposite the gap. However, if the gap is wider than 10 amot, it's not an entrance, but a breach that breaks the integrity of the fence. And once the wall or fence is breached, it completely loses its halachic status as a partition. And therefore, even if its solid parts are collectively wider than all its gaps, it is not a partition at all, and one may not carry even directly opposite the solid parts, as the Rav explains. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.